We've made it to episode 2. I can't believe it, but made it we have. Welcome to RoboWeekly. Dan Saw, my co-host. How are you doing, Dan?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Well, it's cold. I mean, I'm in New York. It snowed today.
Yeah, it's freezing here
guessing...
too. It's like 60.
60. I'm guessing that it's going to be nice outside, but you can't tell because, of course, you're in a programmer's a lair over there. I think we should have a new segment called "Where on the Spectrum is this programmer?"
Well, you ought to look up this guy, Dr. T, who I used to work for, because I went to his house once and he had like wires going like diagonally across the room, like at 4 feet high, and you had to like step over them. So it gets worse.
And programmers who finish their cubicle off with huge pieces of cardboard.
So right. Remember that guy?
Cut off. Yeah, Mark, and we'll leave his last name
and
out.
The CEO came and just pulled it all down and said, we don't have homeless shelters in our office.
A moment. But let's talk about robots. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
A few interesting things this week. One strange announcement, because it came from Apple. And one would think that Apple, especially talking about robots, would make a really interesting announcement. Well, this was definitely interesting. Not what I expected. Let's take a look at and see what they showed us. This is sort of a dancing Siri. Their big deal is it has two modes. One where it just does what it's supposed to do, and it's a lamp. And one where it sort of reacts to you and with you. And if you're dancing, it will see how you're dancing and dance along with you. It's to, I believe, try and generate some kind of relationship with you. This is sort of a researchy kind of thing for Apple. Anyway, they put this out to generate some discussion. It's I guess it's a robot that interacts with you.
Does it clean the dishes? Does it take out the garbage?
No, it doesn't do any of those things. No, but I think it's
what use is it for me?
Well, apparently it's a light, so it shines lights places. But I think it's basically saying that in the future, you might want your robot to be interactive with you as you're doing things, and sort of not just doing things, but doing things with you. I think that's the sense that I think they're trying to communicate. I don't quite get it, and I think I would not like to have that anywhere near me, quite frankly.
I don't get it at all.
Yeah. Anyway, Apple is saying it's a robot. Robot or not bot?
I'd say it's not bot. It's just it's a quivering arm.
Yes, I think it's like something you could have bought in Radio Shack. I'm sure it does have the words AI
in 1980.
Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is a behemoth of a company. Okay, we're seeing the center of that point cloud. At the center of that point cloud is the Cobot Proxy. Cobot, as you probably know, is one of the massive, well-funded robot companies. They've come out with this device called Proxy because Gartner believes that the robotics market is mainly going to be driven by industrial uses. This is an industrial robot, and in addition to which, Cobot, the company itself, has some very, very strong views about foundational models in robots, whether they're necessary or whether we can solve things with LLMs. I wonder if you could weigh in on that and just give me your thoughts.
Well, I mean, an action model is an LLM at base. I mean, it's the same technology. It's transformers is the point. And what transformers can do about condensing data and making it accessible with a layer of what appears to be amazing intelligence. I disagree completely. I think he is focused on warehouses where you have a much better chance of controlling the environment. I agree that the home is probably the most challenging, and a home robot can't cost $150,000. So there's a lot of challenge there. But I think they'll do okay. I think he's throwing some FUD into the market because he's got competitors like Agility that are more focused on the humanoid form factor and probably are doing more with action models. Interesting thing about Cobot, I interviewed there almost a year ago, and I just got my rejection email today. So they're on top of their stuff.
I'm glad that happened. I'm glad that happened. We're going to be talking about what's happening in our lab. soon. And before we move on
Yep.
to the big topic of the day, I just wanted to remind everybody who we are, what we're doing. We're Bayes Edge. We make robots. You'll see our robot either the next episode or the one after. And we intend to put robots into the marketplace, full-size robots that can do things for $2,500. And we aim to do this in May of this year. We aim to be first to market. So please stay tuned for that. Hopefully we'll be showing it to you in the next couple of weeks. It should be pretty exciting. Let's move on to
let me throw in one more thing on this, then we'll move on.
Yeah.
This reminds me a whole lot, and I'm aging myself here, of going back to the days when there were these very specialized Unix machines that were sold to businesses like Sun and Spark and HP and Silicon Graphics, and they were all like in the $20,000 range. And the PC came along and just ate them for lunch because it was for consumers, but it was also good enough to do business. So I think there's an interesting parallel there.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I think there's an interesting parallel there.
Well, I'm certainly very excited. I think that our timing is perfect, and I think that that our robot is close to being perfect for a minimum viable product. And we're going to be
minimum viable robot, MVR.
Minimum viable robot.
And again, looking back at the past, you had the homebrew computer lab or computer group, which was like building stuff like the Altair, and then the Apple I came out, and then the Atari came out, and then the Mac came out, and the PC. And they were like, we can get into this, but this is sort of the early adopter, which we're really hoping to get a community of people working on this in open source world to counter, the large budgets that these companies have.
And if I can add to that, I'll just give everybody out there just a teeny bit more information. Our first 200 units at $2,500, we will be selling on Kickstarter, and we will be selling to people who we know can use them, because we're very, very keen to see what their use cases are. That's actually more important to us than selling these first 200 units. But we'll get to that as we get closer. Let's talk about, is there anybody in there? So this week we see once again from our mentor, Jeffrey Hinton, currently at the University of Toronto.
Maybe your mentor.
No, he was my mentor. He was at the University of Toronto. He just left Google, which allows him to talk more freely. He has become a scaremonger, quite frankly. And he's going around saying, as you can see there, UK security's on an English TV show. You've probably heard him. He believes that there is consciousness, that we should be very, very frightened. We should be frightened of everybody else. Every time I hear him, I get kind of sad. I keep thinking he's sort of backsliding into back propagation rather than moving with everybody else, feed forward. But in any case, the question now is there anybody in there? And before you answer that question, I do want to ask you an initial question, which is, has your answer to that question changed in the last 12 months or so?
No, I don't think so. I think I've had the position that I have, which I can outline for a number of years. Okay,
so I'm just going to, not that mine's as relevant, but I'm just going to give you I was fairly sure that we were working with a statistical machine that was using statistical methods and probabilistic methods to come up with the best guess at certainly in LLMs what the next word was going to be, and of course that extrapolates to lots of other things. But essentially, it was a deterministic machine that was not capable of thinking, and because of that, and because it was a basically provable deterministic machine, I was of the strong opinion that people like Jeffrey Hinton and Eliezer Yudkowsky were completely wrong. There was nobody in there. I have since changed my mind based on stuff that I've seen. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, and
throw it over to you.
Let me ask you why, if you believe that there couldn't be somebody home in the sense of consciousness or sentience or self experience, how did you think human brains worked?
Well, that's the thing. I wasn't sure, and what's changed for me now is, while I haven't changed my mind that what we're dealing with is a probabilistic deterministic machine, what the conclusion I've come to is that we are too. So that's the thing that's changed. And I think, as somebody said, and I believe it was you, some things are better in silicon and some things are better in carbon. I mean, I believe there'll be a meshing of those things.
There's no religious reason carbon is going to conjure up a soul and silicon is not, right? I mean,
that's exactly right. So I now believe there is somebody in there based on a change of mind with what a deterministic machine can do.
So that's when we feel we're perceiving the world and we're an entity in the world, and the world is acting in ways that we compute and think about, and we think we have free will and we think we are a sentient being, you're saying that's an illusion? That's not the case?
No, I'm not saying an illusion. I'm saying that
is free will an illusion?
You're asking me if free will is an illusion?
Yeah.
Based on my new model, no, I do not believe that free will is an illusion. I believe that that these deterministic machines can produce something that has what we call consciousness, that may be the wrong word for it, and that entity can have what can be termed as free choice, which means that it can choose A or B.
But if it's deterministic, Fabian, I'm Socratesing you, but
you're right. Yes.
If it's deterministic, how can that possibly be true? And even if it's probabilistic, like quantum dynamics, then it's just throwing dice. That's no more free will than a deterministic machine. So in both cases, I don't see how you get to free will and real, the reality of the self.
It reminds me, I mean, what you're saying reminds me of the philosophical question, which is, if we are all a product of our DNA and our upbringing, and every decision we do is based on some percentage of those two inputs, then we're not responsible for anything we do. Which is possible. I mean, that may be the case. I mean, that's an argument for there being no evil in the world, that we're just a product of whatever inputs we've been given, which is kind of what I believe. But you're taking away free will, because obviously if it is deterministic, then that's a necessary fact. And so I would say that yes, you've convinced me there is no free will. Ultimately.
Okay, now you want me to give you back the free will?
Sure.
Okay, church Turing Gödel. It is a known fact that a finite state machine with a finite amount of bits to start, but an infinite tape, in other words, it can allocate more bits if it needs to, is
memory.
Completely provably unpredictable, in spite of the fact that it's deterministic. So it can be deterministic and impossible to predict at the same time. The only way to predict it is to run it through its paces and go through every computation that it was going to go through. There's no shortcut.
Okay, but I'm not sure that necessarily gives you free will back. I mean, all that's saying is you can't predict what the outcome's going to be.
It's a dig at determinism, right? Because even so, I can have 4,000 bits that are an RSA encryption key, but if I don't know the factors of those bits, I cannot unencrypt that RSA message, right? So those 4,000 bits, I know each bit, but I don't know if they're the product of a prime. And so that means I can have knowledge without having actual knowledge of the thing I think I have knowledge of, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Okay. Well, I think
sorry, let me let you respond.
No. I was going to say we're getting pretty deep into the woods, but if you want to continue.
Well, so I think the viewpoint that I adhere to, and I think you actually sort of espoused it a little bit, maybe unknowingly, is called compatibilism, which was championed by Daniel Dennett, who passed away recently, who's a real icon in this field. He wrote modest tomes like Consciousness Explained, and another one called Elbow Room. And he fought with Searle over this Chinese room thing, which we can get into. But then if you want to keep this to 20-25 minutes, that will not work if we bring up the Chinese room. The Chinese room eats up time. But let's do that on another episode. Let me focus now on today's technology, okay? Because that's what matters in practice. And I absolutely believe that a silicon-based machine, if you want to call it a machine or entity of some sort, can be just as conscious and have whatever degree of free will we have, it can have. And whatever, ability we have to feel like we are something in the universe, and we have qualia, which are like red is red, sad minor chords are sad. Whatever we have in that respect can be had in silicon, or in some other substrate. It doesn't matter if I run my C code in silicon or carbon, right? It's still the same software. But whether today's technology is conscious is kind of similar to asking, is this ant conscious, or is this spider, or is this lizard, or is this mouse, or is this cat, or this dog, or this primate, or this human, right? Somewhere along that line, from like bacteria, which could go even farther back to RNA and protein sequences in the primordial soup, that you can look at and say, there's no way this is conscious. And yet somehow it builds up the consciousness. The same thing is going on with silicon, right?
So it's a continuum, and it's like, where are we in that? Yeah.
Right. The TI-99 was definitely not conscious. Claude 3.5 Sonnet. Have you talked to Claude 3.5 Sonnet? Because there's a bit of an underground feeling that this is a bit of a breakthrough. So,
well, the moment that I personally had a breakthrough moment was when in our lab we built a robot that didn't have any arms, and we gave it a voice and
a prompt that explained what it looked like.
Yeah, and it started actually getting pissed off that it had no arms, and I took a step back and an intake of breath, I have to say.
Right. But it could just be clever programming.
It got an attitude. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what it was, but it got a tude.
Right.
And if it had a gun, it might have killed me. I don't know.
So here's my take on it. What I've seen with GPT and Claude and these foundational models, frontier models as they call them, convinces me that that's part of what makes a brain like a mammal conscious. What's missing is not that it's better at logic. I mean, it can already pass the LSAT and get 1600 on the SATs. It's better than most people and probably better than you at math and science and programming, and that's clear, right? So its STEM skills are just unarguable and are going to keep on going, and there's a whole social impact to that, which we can talk about in another episode. But what is missing is not like fundamental reasoning or logic or anything like that. I mean, you don't have that in a 4-year-old or a dog. You still think of them as conscious mostly. Certainly a 4-year-old human, he can't do math. He's going to get a 0 on the SAT, and we still give him consciousness. But what's going on there is that what they do lack is continuity of memory and experience, right? Because they have this token window. So they're sort of like a late stage Alzheimer's patient in a way, and that every time you interact with them, unless you explicitly continue a previous chat, and at that point you'll run out of tokens. So you usually start over the chat, and so that doesn't give this entity a chance to build a personality and a set of relationships with the entities that it's interacting with, right? But as soon as they solve the memory problem, and I worked with a group called was a MEM GPT. They've renamed it something and raised a ton of money. This was a year or so ago, and they were basically doing a sort of an advanced version of what they call RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation, which is basically giving a database to the AI and telling it to use this database to remember things. But that's not how. That's quite different than how humans remember things. There's a field called continuous learning, where they're attempting to use LoRa and PEFT and things to retrain the network, even overnight, almost like dreaming. Like you go to sleep and your brain is sort of defragging. So there's a similar thing where you go to sleep, the computer goes to sleep, the AI goes to sleep, and you retrain it on the data that you dealt with in the daytime.
It accumulated during the daytime.
Right. It's called continuous learning, and actually, a friend of mine sort of had a similar idea when this stuff first came out, and then they started writing papers about it. All those problems are going to be solved in the next 18 months. And so my opinion is, if I had to put a bet on it, it's early 2025. By 2027, we will have AIs that are that are increasingly difficult for, what's his name, Marcus, I forget his first name, the guy who thinks everything's a stochastic parrot. Those
Marcus?
people are, sorry, Gary Marcus, right? And, John Searle, who I think may have passed away, but if he was alive, he'd be babbling about his Chinese room.
Well,
and they're all irrelevant because it's going to seem obvious to any 10-year-old or 12-year-old or anybody with a brain that these things are similar to us. And I have more to say on this, but I warned you I had a lot to say on this subject. I don't want to. Okay. You go for a second because I have another thing I want to hit on.
Yeah. Okay. While you're thinking about how you want to wrap this up, I'm just going to tell everybody a little bit about what our roadmap is. We intend to have 200 robots in the marketplace by May of this year. We intend to have 10,000 into this marketplace 12 months later. We are writing software for these robots. We are a software
open
company.
Source. We're going to have open source community.
We're writing software so these robots can do things. We're hoping people will help us. We've ended up being in the hardware business by accident because nobody's putting out robots less than $20,000. So we are, right. And we figured out a way to do it. We have some protection for those ideas that enable us to do that. And I'm very excited to take you into the Bay's Edge lab, hopefully next episode or certainly the one after. So Dan, why don't you give us some final thoughts and wrap up this episode for us?
Sure. So I heard a talk a while ago by Ilya Sutskever where he was asked, how would we know if these machines are intelligent or conscious? And the sort of naive proposal is, well, you just ask them. And I've asked Claude, and sometimes he says yes, and sometimes he says no. I'm giving him gender, I don't know. Here's the problem. What I don't think anybody saw coming in AI was that the great breakthrough would come in language first before embodiment. And the wonderful thing about that is we have all this language, on the internet from, years, millions of books and stuff. And that turned out to be enough data to train a large network with transformer technology to, have some sort of apparent intelligence over that data set. But here's the problem. Because they learn language first, if you ask them if they're conscious, they have 1,000 science fiction books and movies they can go to see like data on Star Trek, HAL in 2001. There's all this like trope and meme stuff out there in popular culture, and they can start spouting off John Searle or Daniel Dennett's point of view, and so they're too verbally capable for them to be a reliable narrator. And what Sutskever said, and I totally agree with, is it would be a really interesting experiment to get an embodied, I think he said embodied AI, but that doesn't even matter. Get an AI and that's completely vanilla, has no training on the internet or anything. Train it up simply like the way you raise a child. Never have a discussion with it that you've instigated about consciousness or, qualia and stuff like that. Just teach it about the real world. And then if it starts talking about that on its own, you've got a pretty strong signal. But it's impossible to do that experiment with a well-trained frontier model that's eaten up all of the internet.
Well, maybe we can try and do that. I mean, that's like it reminds me of those people that try and bring babies into the world without any gender whatsoever, and dress it in these very gentlest clothes and don't give it any gender-specific toys, and let it make up its own mind as to whether it's going to conform to its birth gender. It reminds me of that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I know a three-year-old who was raised by very liberal anti-gun people, and he knew his finger could shoot bullets and kill people like by the time he was 3. So,
no, my son, I mean, we never gave him guns, and by the time he was 3, he used his Lego to make guns, and we've never seen them before. Like, okay. Anyway, thank you all for watching once again. We really appreciate your time. If you could subscribe, we'd really appreciate it. My kids got really mad when I said I was going to say smash that subscribe button. So let's say it. Smash that. Apparently that means something else. But thank you all. Bye.
Oh. Bye.